Hi, everyone. Hope you're having a good evening. We want to welcome you to this webinar. We're going to be talking about applying to doctoral programs in counseling psychology. I know this is such a busy time in the semester, so thanks for tuning in for this, and hopefully you'll find some tips that are helpful. So this webinar is hosted by student affiliates of 17, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about SAS, as we call it, and then we'll kind of jump in to the rest of the presentation. APA Division 17 is the Society for Counseling Psychology with the American Psychological Association. And it's really our professional home for all counseling psychology professionals and affiliates like us, like students, master's students, doctoral students, undergraduate students as well. We're really committed to a strengths-based, person-centered, systems orientation, multiculturalism, and social justice are really critical in counseling psychology, and we focus on vocational and lifespan issues. So hopefully these sound like interesting areas to you if you're applying to programs in counseling psychology. So this is a really great, the Division 17, becoming a student affiliate of Division 17 is a great way to connect with counseling psychology broadly. And SAS is the student organization that is associated with Division 17. So we host webinars like this and provide other professional development resources. We have a listserv where we forward a bunch of information and about webinars, but other opportunities as well. There's some event funding that is provided through SAS to have counseling psych related events on your campus. There's also the ability to apply for travel awards and other types of awards. Conferences can be really expensive, so getting support to go to those conferences can be really helpful. Also great for networking. It's cool to meet connections across different campuses and meet other students in counseling psych programs. One thing that we want to advertise is the Counseling Psychology Conference that is coming up in April, and it is in New Orleans, and it is a great opportunity to, I think Dr. Singh, the president of Division 17, calls it the family reunion for this counseling psych conference. There's also the APA convention in August, and we usually have a lot of SAS related events, and we're planning some things already, thinking for that trip to Washington, DC coming up. There are a lot of leadership opportunities in SAS as well, to be a representative at your program, or even to be a coordinator in your region. And when you join Division 17, you automatically become a member of SAS. So if you're interested in joining, check out that website and feel free to ask myself or Gloria any questions about SAS. So brief overview of SAS. And now we're kind of going to get into the Q&A here.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. So as you saw in the emails and social media advertisement about this webinar, we're going to be holding a Q&A at the end of the conversation to directly address questions that you have about the process of applying and interviewing at doctoral programs across the country. We encourage you to stay on for that portion of the webinar, and we're going to be overall on for about an hour, and we expect to begin the Q&A after about 35 minutes. The first part is going to be recorded, so this is a time when, questions that you might be asking will be recorded and posted online, so we want to make you aware of that. The call is being recorded as we speak, but we also realize that there are some questions you may have, as well as things presenters might want to share that you'd prefer more privacy around. And so the last 15 minutes of the call, what we're calling the debrief, will not be recorded. So we're going to be turning the recording function off and have a chance to continue the conversation privately. So thanks again for all the questions that you've sent, and the Q&A function is live, so please feel free to continue sending questions in for us to address at the end throughout the conversation. So in terms of the overall structure, if we could advance the slide. Colleen, could you advance the slide there? Okay, overview. So now that you have that rundown, we're going to be introducing ourselves and then doing a poll actually to learn a little bit more about you, your stage in the application process, kind of what your training status is and your background with psychology. Then Siwin and others are going to be talking about deciding where to apply, as well as application and interview tips. And then we'll launch into the Q&A and the debrief that I just discussed. Okay.
Awesome. So, hi everyone, I'm Sandra Gomez. I'm currently the membership co-chair of SAS. I'm a second year master student here at University of Missouri. And currently in the process of applying to PhD programs too. So today we have some awesome presenters who have been through the process that will be able to speak on their experience and knowledge. And we have 5 presenters representing University of Missouri, Radford University, University of Miami, and Ball State. And I'll let them introduce themselves. I think Brittany's the first one on there, so if you can go.
Sure. Yeah, of course. My name is Brittany Gray, and I use pronouns she, her, hers. I'm currently at Radford University in their Counseling Psychology PsyD program. I received my master's degree from the University of Kentucky just this past May 2019. And as far as research interests go, I've been doing a lot on Appalachian women's mental health help seeking recently, but I also love doing research on cultural humility and ethics around giving, counseling services to marginalized groups. And as far as career goals go for me, I'm really hoping to, of course, finish up this doctoral program and then go on to work at community mental health centers where I can practice and do a little bit of research within the community.
Hello, my name is Siwin Louder. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm currently a first-year doctoral student in the Counseling Psychology PhD program at the University of Miami. I came in with a master's degree in clinical psychology from Teachers College at Columbia University. And my research interests and somewhat clinical interests as well deal with the broad areas of emotion regulation, motivation, and community-based interventions. As far as career goals, that is I'm just getting started, so that's very fuzzy, but the overall big goal for me, I'd like to make an integrated health system or integrated health community center where physical, mental, and emotional health needs are met and as well as maintained. So that's what I'm going for.
Hi everybody, I'm Paulina Wojtach and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm currently a second year doctoral student in the Counseling Psychology PhD program at Ball State University. I went in with a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling and social psychology from Ball State into my doc program. My current research interests are related to counselor development, especially within multicultural competence and multicultural self-efficacy when we're working with immigrant populations specifically. My career goals overall are to become a professor, but also do some client work and assessment as well on the side.
Thank you, Paulina. All right. My name's Colleen Eddy. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm in the Counseling Psychology program here at the University of Missouri. I'm a 5th year in the program. I'm currently applying for internship. So I am interested in youth mental health in schools and supporting teachers to cope with stress and improving working conditions for teachers. Let's see, clinical goals. I like working with families. I like working with youth. Career goals, first matching for internship and then thinking faculty positions later on. Thanks, Colin.
Hi, everyone. I am Gloria McGillen. I am a third-year PhD candidate, also here at Mizzou, and co-chair of SAS with Colleen, as well as Letitia Martinez, who couldn't be here tonight. She is sick, but she helped put the presentation together, so I just wanted to acknowledge her. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I came into Mizzou with a master's degree in counseling psychology from Boston College, and my undergraduate work was at St. John's College, Great Books program, sort of largely focusing on philosophy and the history of math and science. My current research interests are related to cultural and racial diversity in the US working class, and how experiences of classism and racialized classism impact vocational development, and how psychologists can contribute to economic justice organizations like the labor movement.
Great, everyone. So before we kind of get into the meat and potatoes of this discussion, we really want to get a sense of where everyone is in the process so we know where to focus the presentation. A poll of some sort should be coming up on your screen, and we want to know whether are you applying this cycle or are you thinking about applying for a future cycle? Are you currently a student, or are you trying to make the transition from working out or like working full-time to becoming a student again? And also, if you have any background in psychology, it'll really help us kind of tailor the presentation and the workshop to really suit your goals. So if you could take a moment to fill that out really quickly.
And presenters, can you all see the results of the poll?
I cannot.
Okay. I will report back here. I'm going to leave it open for a few more seconds as results roll in. We've got about 22, 28 folks who've responded. Okay, a couple more seconds and we're going to close this out. About 78 people, 78% have voted. Okay, countdown 1, 2, 3. Is it visible now? Or is it just me? Okay, so I'll announce the results here. So it looks like slightly under half of you, 45% are applying this year, and 55% are applying in a future cycle. So we're kind of a split house. 14% of people are currently bachelor students, 59% are currently master's students, 9% of you are post-bachelor's degrees, so out of school and out in the world, and 18% the same, but with a master's. In terms of having the types of background in psychology we listed, 77% do, but 23% don't. So there is a snapshot of all that if you can see it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so then we'll just move on with the presentation as planned, just kind of like going over everything. And then like was mentioned at the beginning, we'll talk a little bit about the specific questions that you have about where you are in the process. But the first topic of conversation that we're going to have is deciding where to apply. So the first thing to really think about is what type of degree that you want. Do you want a PhD or a PsyD? And historically, the PhD is a little bit older, but they both have different instances. So the PhD is supposed to be an equal emphasis on science and practice. That is the idea. It's the Boulder model. The PsyD, came about a little later. It's a doctorate in psychology, and that's more practice focused as well. Brittany's going to say a little bit about a PsyD program. I'm currently in a PhD program. So there's like a dissertation requirement. You still have your practicum hours, but there's that expectation that your research informs your practice and that like research takes up a significant amount of my time.
Yeah, so as far as the PsyD goes, it really is more times than not the like practitioner scholar model rather than the scientist practitioner model that a lot of PhDs are in counseling psych. Over at Radford, we're a little bit unique in that a dissertation is required at Radford University, but at the majority of PsyD programs, they are not. You'll do more of like maybe like a program review, or you'll be developing maybe some sort of intervention for a group, or doing a review of an intervention that you're interested in. But there are a handful of programs. If you are wanting to do a dissertation for some reason, there are some PsyD programs out there. In addition to that, there are some important things to talk about for PsyDs that go along with funding. Historically, PsyDs are much less likely to be funded when compared to PhD programs, but there are a handful that do receive funding. So that is definitely something to consider when you're looking into going into a doctoral program for several years. And then the last thing really that can be different in PsyD programs is your cohort sizes. A lot of times there's a lot more people admitted into cohorts, which affects like the advisor-mentor relationship. So at a lot of PsyD programs, you may not have one specific mentor that you go to that you match with over research. You may be kind of mentored by all of the core faculty. But just like, you know, Radford is similar a lot of times to PhD programs here, and I think Baylor and then Rutgers as well, their PsyD programs kind of has a nice split between the two, where you're still getting an emphasis on research, but more so how that impacts your clinical practice. So they want you to be, you know, able to look at a piece of research and know how it applies to you. But those are the major differences that I can think between PhDs and PsyDs, but I'd be happy to answer more questions if people have more that they want to know about those differences.
Great, thank you so much, Brittany. Yeah, as she was saying, there is just it's very program specific. The book that's on your screen, The Insider's Guide to Graduate Programs in Clinical and Counseling Psychology, it's very clutch when it comes to figuring out like each program, where do they fit on the practice versus research scale? Is it like practice heavy program, or is it a research heavy program, and like are they equal emphasis? So that's a really helpful guide for those of you who are thinking about applying. I know it was very helpful to me when I was applying. Another thing to think about is funding. Depending on your personal financial situation, asking the type of questions like, is this program fully funded? Is it a tuition waiver? Is it just partially? Do they expect me to work? What type of funding can I expect? And is the funding just for the first year? Does it cover the summer? Is it all throughout my graduate years? Getting the specifics of that as well. And kind of being honest with yourself and your situation. And that'll help, quite frankly, narrow down the schools that you need to go to. Like for me, I was financially limited. Like I can't, you know, spend X amount to go to my dream school if they're not funding me. So that was an easy way to kind of narrow down my list. Location as well. So the thing with these advanced degrees is that this place that you're going to school, you're going to be living there for like 5-6 years. And so your life is going to be there. So knowing where you're going, understanding, can you, for lack of a better term, vibe with the community that you're going to be in? Something that I did with my applications, I applied to places only where I knew at least one person in the area. So that for me, like, eliminated a lot of places in the Midwest because I didn't know anyone in the Midwest, but I do know people up and down the East Coast. And I have a couple of friends who live down in Miami. I had a handful of friends who lived up in New York, a few friends in North Carolina, or my family's from North Carolina. So I was able to kind of localize it that way. But keeping in mind that wherever you're wherever you apply to school and wherever you eventually end up accepting, you're going to be living there. So thinking about location ahead of time. As well as an advisor match is also something to think about. So in these smaller cohort programs, so my current cohort is 4 people, and I am working one-on-one a lot with my advisor and being sure that you don't have to have exactly matching research interests, but there should at least be some overlap there. So that way your advisor can kind of give you the skills that you need and prepare you in a way to be the professional in the academic world. Interpersonal climate as well. How are the people in the program getting the opportunity to talk with more advanced students? How are the first years handling, like being in the program versus how the third year and the fourth years? Do you feel supported by your advisor? Do you feel supported by the environment? Do you like your cohort? Little things like that. It's the PhD process is the doctorate process is very isolating. So it's important to have like an interpersonal climate that you can thrive in. And last but not least, the hidden fees. So things like your application fees, standing your standardized tests. Last time I checked, or my application year, it was $27 per GRE test that you wanted to send. If you want to apply to 10 schools, that's $270. If you want to apply to 20 schools, that's more than $270. I'm sorry, I'm not great at math. But so these types of things add up. Same with transcripts. If you're an international student, then you're going to have to also pay for your TOEFL, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but that's standardized test to show your proficiency in English. So kind of keeping in mind factors like that. And when you go to that big list of all the different APA accredited psychology programs out there, keeping in mind, it's like, okay, I got it. This is the number I've got. Let's see if we can narrow it down.
And just real quick, something else to touch on too, choosing between the PhD and PsyD, I think it's a really big ask of a lot of people, but it really depends on what you want to do. If you want to be a clinician mainly, a PsyD is probably what you want. If you maybe want to go into academia, if you want to do research primarily, if you want to be a professor, then a PhD might be the road you want to take. Not that one can't be the other at the doctoral level, but you're just going to get the training that you want and the training that you need for what you want to do. So I think that's really the bottom line of choosing which program to apply to.
Definitely.
So I'm going to start talking about some application tips, mainly about your transcripts, standardized test scores, and letters of rec. And these are 3 things that you want to be working on early in the game. So at least minimum a month before you're applying, these are some things that you already want to be working on. With transcripts and standardized test scores, if you're sending them in the mail, they can get lost, they can get misplaced in different offices. So it's always good to send those earlier rather than later, just because you want to be able to figure out what happened and if you have time to do that again. So you really want to, in a way, keep track of where you sent it, how you sent it, and when you sent them, so that if the university also asks you if you did, you can show them how you did it. Some schools also accept transcripts and standardized test scores online. So you can always double check when you are sending it that you have the correct code for the correct department. So a lot of the times they'll give you an email address to send transcripts to through your university, or they'll give you a specific code for your GRE scores to be sent through that code. Make sure and double check and triple check that you're sending it to the correct department, because that can also get lost that way. So if perhaps you didn't work on that ahead of time and you might be worried about them being on time, you can also ask the schools if they are required by the deadline, because some schools are actually flexible about whether or not they get your transcripts or standardized scores by that hard deadline. They want certain things ahead of time compared to other things. So you want to think about that. And the main reason that we want to also work ahead is because your GRE score, once you take the GRE, it's going to take a few weeks for you to get your test scores. And then if you're sending that after you took your test, then that's another few more weeks for the school to get it from ETS. So you want to think backwards of, okay, how much time is this going to take through the process itself? Because you do get to send it to 4 schools automatically when you are taking the test, but however, past those 4 schools, that's something that you're going to have to wait for once you get your test scores back. So try to work on that ahead of time and try to really be on top of that. When it comes to letters of rec, that's another thing that we have to work ahead of, because we're working with other people's schedules, and it's multiple people's schedules, because usually these programs want letters from lots of different people. So usually I see around from 2 to 3 in most programs. I've also seen 4 letters of rec. So you also want to let these individuals know ahead of time, like, I'm considering you to be a letter writer, but also ask if they can write you a good letter of recommendation. You don't want somebody who's going to write a not very outstanding letter of recommendation for you. So when you ask them, make sure that they can actually send a good letter of recommendation that shows that you are a good student or a good researcher or a good clinician, because you want to show the best of you within your letter of recommendation. So one thing that I've really heard that I've taken to heart is trying to get individuals who speak to different strengths related to the program that you're applying to. So having somebody who can focus on your clinical skills specifically, so that might be your supervisor in a practicum, or if you've worked at an internship that was clinical, or any other sort of like clinical aspect where you're working with people. So if you're at a bachelor's level, you might not have that much clinical experience, but what type of experiences do you have where you are working with people? And what strengths can they pull that where it's more clinical? However, if you also have somebody that you've been working on research, then you want that person to show your strengths within research as well. And then maybe have some advocacy. Some programs focus on diversity or social justice. So pick your letter writers based on the strengths of yourself, but also what programs they match to, so that you can really show a holistic view of yourself compared to the same letter being sent by multiple people. So you don't want 5 people just to say a very generic letter. You want to showcase all of your different strengths all around. You also want to provide your letter writers a list of schools, programs, and due dates. So they also want to be aware of what is expected from these schools. What are they looking for? Are you applying to a PhD versus a PsyD program? Are you applying to counseling or clinical or school psych? These are things that they're going to want to know so that they can tailor their letter best for you. And with that, due dates. Different schools have different due dates, and if this letter writer is also writing letters for 3 other different students, that's also a lot of different schools to apply to, a lot of different dates. So you want to make sure that they're on top of it as much as they can be for you, so that it can work out the best in your interest. So you want to make sure that you're providing as much information. I'm also seeing some questions about letters of rec from faculty you know. So one of the questions is it strategic to get a letter of rec from faculty you know through association boards but haven't studied under or researched under? If you do have a relationship with them and they can speak to a certain strength that you're looking for, then I would say yes. However, if they can't speak to a certain strength that you're looking for within the program, I wouldn't necessarily push that. So it really depends on what you're hoping the faculty will speak on for you. And then when it comes to a particular range of GRE scores that might be impressive to schools, I would always look at different websites the schools offer. So typically schools will actually post on their websites what is the range of GRE scores that they're looking for. Some students took the GRE under different levels when it was the different types of scores compared to how it is now. So they'll have the different types of GRE scores and what they're looking for. And some of them will also provide a cutoff score for you where they say you shouldn't really apply under a certain amount of score, just so that you also don't spend your money applying to a school.
The Insider's Guide is also a great resource for this. So a large majority of programs report the GRE scores by subsection of their accepted students. So that can also be a way to get a rough range of what they have considered in the past as competitive.
One of the best pieces of advice I got about GRE scores, though, is that no one ever lets you into a program because of your GRE scores. So it's enough to get you, kind of get your application, get your essay in front of somebody, but no one ever gonna, oh, this person has a perfect GRE score, I've got to let them into their program. So if you are worried, like you feel like your score could be higher, but you're not too certain about it, just keep that in mind.
And we can just, do any of the programs require psychology-focused GRE exams? Yes, some of them do. So that's something to keep in mind. And they will typically post that. Though I did have one that said that they required it, I applied anyway, and they still accepted me into the program without taking the GRE. It's not the current program that I'm in, but it's always an option. So always reach out to the school if it's actually required, but there are some that will require it. Okay, we're gonna go ahead to the next slides just for the sake of time.
Yeah, so a little bit about personal statements or statements of purpose. Most PhD and PsyD programs will require you to write this little guy up, and they usually will give you a word limit that you should not go over, or at least this many words, just depending on the program. So just a few quick things about that. This personal statement is not to just regurgitate your CV. You're not trying to show them all the things you've done, all the things you've been involved with. This really is to showcase you as an individual. And so advice that I've gotten from people in programs is that first introductory paragraph should get them interested. And kind of one of the questions that was asked is what can set people apart that maybe you wouldn't think about. And a lot of times I think it's this personal statement. If you can get them hooked and they're like, who is this person? They seem really interesting. They have certain qualities that might be really helpful to see in a psychologist. That's what's going to get them to remember your name a little bit. And that's kind of a piece of the personal statement where you do have some creative flexibility and you can flex those creative muscles and just really tell them who you are. But of course, with everything, there has to be balance. And I have this piece on avoiding kisses of death here, which are basically things that you could put in a personal statement that just really throw you out of the running. And just real briefly, some of those things could be really detailed references like to your own mental health, really, really personal stories that feel excessive in nature and could maybe give people looking at your application the idea that you don't understand maybe interpersonal boundaries and sharing, or anything that could indicate that maybe you could not handle like the rigor of a doctoral program, which it is very rigorous. Not to say that there's anything wrong with struggling with mental health issues, but it's not really something you want to showcase in your doctoral application. Another piece would be especially if you're applying to a research heavy program, is putting forward really non-specific research goals. So saying things like, I'm interested in all research, or I'd like to do anything and everything. Really at this point, when you're applying to a doctoral program, you should have something nailed down. That doesn't necessarily pigeonhole you into that one thing for your whole doctoral career, but you need to be able to articulate the types of things you're interested in doing, especially if you're applying to programs where it's that mentorship model where you're matching with someone based on research interests. Additionally, another one would be making really cliche statements of like, I'm coming into psychology because I just want to help people, or I want to make the world a better place. I guarantee the people looking at these applications see that so many times and they're not going to remember it, and it's probably going to start to get on their nerves. So that's one thing to try to avoid. And more than anything, just be yourself. Another thing that I've heard is be sure to personalize those personal statements to a certain point. For each school you apply to, be sure to proofread, please, and don't forget to change university names out or advisors' names out. Make sure you're sending the right personal statement to the right school, because that doesn't look good. That you're, just doing a form letter, which I'd say at this level it's okay. to kind of send the same personal statement or the shell of the same statement all around. But make sure you're putting stuff in there to say, you know, this school is going to be a good fit for me for these specific reasons. And then I feel like this is kind of, I think we all know this, is just make sure it's well written. Free of any grammatical errors, spelling errors, organized and easy to read. So as with this and the CV, you want it to flow nicely, needs to be easy on the eyes, and they don't need to have to think real hard to try and understand the information you're putting forward to them. And a little bit about the CV too, there's all different kinds of ways that people do their curriculum bios, and I'm not sure if there's one way that's right, but it's just that same concept of make sure it's formatted well, make sure it's organized very well, it's consistent all throughout as far as font goes and formatting goes. And the most important feedback I got was that it's easy on the eyes. It doesn't take a huge amount of cognitive energy to try to understand why you included this here or why it fits here. And as far as what kinds of things should be include your education history, research experience, clinical experience, and anything else really that you feel like pertains to this particular university. And you know, there's all kinds of examples out there on the internet, and you can just kind of choose whichever format feels like it fits for you. And then I know somebody had sent a question beforehand to us about getting feedback on your materials. I think that is a huge advantage, especially if you have people who are in doctoral programs or faculty that can do that for you. But I think there's definitely a ceiling to that, because everyone's going to have different feedback, and you might drive yourself a little wacky if you're trying to integrate the feedback of 5, 6, 7 people. So for me, I had 2 doctoral students who had been through the process look over it for me and give me repeated feedback, as well as 1 faculty member that I was very close with that helped me out with it. But I'm sure other people have different experiences as well.
Great. Just to speak a little bit about the CV and the statement of purpose experience. So I was in a master's program at the time. So I went to my school's writing center, and they helped me out so much because the writing center, they're all about making sure people want to read it. And you will not get into a school if nobody wants to finish your statement of purpose or no one wants to finish reading your CV. One tip that she gave me about my CV in particular, I had these thick bold lines underneath the headings for each section. And she said, here's the thing, most of these schools, they have like scanners to look at these CVs. When they get to a thick line like this, they assume that they're at the end of the document, and then nothing comes up for your page. So she was like, you have to get rid of these thick lines. So be aware of your resources. So if you're currently in school, going to your school's career center or your writing center, if you've recently graduated, you'd be surprised at how those alumni ties what kind of resources you still have access to in the career center and at the writing center, because it looks good to the university to have their alumni do well. And to reiterate the things that should be included on the CV and things like that, I remember there was one question about to include something in both areas, or whether if something applies to 2 sections of your CV, whether to apply it in 2 sections or not. I know for my work study job, I had clinical experience with that because it was in a mental health center, but also it was a professional experience. So I was handling money. I was like inputting information. So I ended up splitting that up. And that was advice I got from a doctoral student who helped me go through my CV and statement of purpose. So that's kind of how both of those, I got one doctoral student to kind of help me out with her input, and then also Heidi from the Writing Center, she helped me out with her input. And also there's some non-traditional resources. So I got my sister and some friends to read my application and be like, what do you think about my personal statement? Like, what should I add? And then like, you know, my sister knows, like, what about this thing you did? And I'm just like, oh yeah, I did do that thing. So really like friends and siblings, like in family, they can really help flesh out your application in ways that you may not even think of, because they know you so well and they may know of certain things that are important to add.
And you really do. You want your personhood to come across. I mean, I think Brittany and Siwan have said it very well. Faculty review many applications, sometimes hundreds of applications. And if they're able to get a sense of your personality as well as your professionalism and your clear reasoning for applying to their program, it's going to make you stick in their minds and get you on to that next stage. Okay. So on to that next stage, interviewing tips. So first of all, we wanted to say that, you know, if you don't receive invitations to interview, and it's really your passion to come into the field of psychology, keep going. It's not unusual for people not to get interview invitations on the first round, and particularly in counseling psychology if you're right out of a bachelor's program. Oftentimes people are still growing in their research and clinical identity and interests, and that can be often a reason why you aren't selected for interviews, because faculty get the sense that you're still in an early stage of developing those things, and you know, would want to invite you when you're further along in the process. So keep going, continue honing those things and apply again. Reach out for the support that you need that has been described so far on the webinar, to polish up those pieces and try again in a future year. The interview process is its own beast, and we realize that we're not going to be able to cover all of the key advice on this call, because we do want to be able to get to the Q&A and the debrief. So we'd like to invite you to tune in December for a follow-up webinar just focused on the interview experience. And we don't have a date for that yet, but please watch out on the listserv and our social media for that. But there are some things that you can start working on now and planning ahead for. So the first is, if you're applying to multiple programs, beginning to think about your personal ranking, which should be flexible. You're going to learn things in the process of interviewing that are going to affect, you know, where programs fall. But because interview dates are often overlapping, it's not uncommon for people to get into a situation where they have invitations on the same day, and so have to make some calls about where they may want to go in person, where they may want to just do a video interview if it's available, and where they may want to decline the interview. Additionally, if you're getting many invitations, then and you're getting invitations from programs that you know are not high on your list, and you've started to receive offers, that's another situation in which having your preferences in mind is valuable, because it's important to decline those invitations quickly so that other students can fill those slots and have an opportunity to meet and speak with faculty and other students in those programs. The interview process is a season. Past dates are published online, typically through Grad Cafe results search, which we have a link to at the end of this slideshow if the current ones are not announced on program websites. And I would suggest scanning those so that you can get a sense for any practica, jobs, as well as your courses, about the time frame in which you might need to be asking for time off. Keep in mind with Grad Cafe, those are past dates from past years, so they may not align with the current dates, but frequently they do, and so they can give you a good ballpark sense. Travel can be very expensive, especially if you're applying in different regions that might require you to travel. So thinking ahead about how you want to finance things if you want to attempt to do that, as well as getting information about where telephone interviews are possible, is really important. And finally, we want to suggest being creative around ways to save money. So if you have a family network or a friend network or a network through other connections like your undergraduate peers that are in different locations, if programs don't advertise that they offer housing with students, tapping some of those connections can be a really important and valuable way to save money so that you're not dumping lots of money into trying to buy hotel rooms. So those are things to plan ahead for now that we hope are helpful to have in mind throughout November and December as you're waiting on invitations. But again, we'll be going into much more depth on the interview process in our December webinar, so please tune in.
Yeah, and just speaking real quick to that financial piece as far as interviews go, that was something that last year I really didn't consider until it was interview season and that spring semester had started. And I did apply to 7 different places and received interviews at several that were sort of spread out all over the country. And so in order to cover the costs, or at least the costs that I expected for interview season, I actually took out a small loan. Just because it is expensive to travel. I had one of my schools in Salt Lake City in Utah, and of course at the time I was living in Kentucky. So it was going to cost a lot to get there and stay there. So all of this is really important to start considering now, so it doesn't sneak up on you and you don't feel that extra level of stress, you know, that's already there regarding interviews when it comes to paying for it. Feedback I got as far as phone interviews go is I think they want you to be there in person if you're invited for an in-person interview. Some places are very flexible with phone interviews and will offer them. But I think it's important if you're applying to these schools to be willing to go to those interview dates if you can.
Yes, so now we'll move into the Q&A, and just a reminder that this section will be recorded, but the debrief will not. So I'm wondering if we can. Questions. So if you have questions, feel free to submit them right now. Otherwise, some questions that we collected from students that are in the process. Let's see. So someone that has a wide array of research interests, how would they go about like deciding on what programs to apply? If anyone can speak to that or had experience kind of refining their interests, but really wanting to apply to a PhD program.
What I ended up doing, my advisor in my master's program ended up helping me a lot with that. He gave me a tool where he was like, okay, so like the 3-foot versus the 300-foot approach. 3-foot was like anything that we do here in lab that you have an interest in, write it down. And then 300-foot, write anything just like out in your classes that you find on your own that you have an interest in, write it down, and then you'll start to see threads kind of tying them together. So kind of being able to, and like having someone who is in that field, being able to kind of sift through that with you was like really helpful for me. So I would recommend like kind of like writing it down, getting it on paper, like what are these research interests? And then if you have the opportunity, sitting down with someone in the field and just trying to be like, okay, like, what do I like about each one of these? And then usually you can bridge together something that's broad enough to encompass them at like the core area of your interest, but specific enough so that way you can start applying to these programs.
Thanks, I really like that. That's useful for me too. All right, and looking at some questions that have been posted, are there any other resources you guys have regarding looking at grad schools? The Insider's Guide looks helpful, but anything online?
So I really utilized the APA's website where they have all of the APA accredited programs. That's another piece we didn't really talk on, but it's really important to go to an APA accredited school if you're wanting to be a psychologist who gets an APA accredited internship, which we all must have. So I used that website, and I did have some restrictions as far as where I was willing to move, a lot like you, Seawin. I wanted to have people there that I knew, and I wanted to be comfortable. So I just would narrow that down to the states I was willing to move to, and then kind of just click through the programs really briefly, kind of do a brief scan to see if anyone was doing the research I wanted to do, or if it seemed like it was a good fit. And I just started compiling those schools in a big Excel spreadsheet. It required a lot of research, so I slowly but surely eliminated schools out of that spreadsheet and gave them a rank. You know, green for these are my very top schools I really would be super jazzed to get in. Orange, which I wouldn't be too upset about, but I'd rather have the others. And then anything else just kind of got thrown out. So it does take a lot of work to decide what's going to be a good fit for you. But that APA website, it was a huge tool that I utilized for a very long time when I was trying to figure that out.
I also think Google Scholar cannot be sold, particularly if you have a strong research interest. It's really important, both in seeking an advisor match as well as to getting to know the overall culture of programs, to get in there and look at the publications of recent, especially the recent publications of the faculty in those programs. Faculty websites are not always totally up to date on what faculty are doing now. Particular grants that are active at different programs and may provide substantial funding opportunities for students. So really digging in with Google Scholar, it's free, it's available. You don't have to be attached to a university. So many papers now are their full text. I spent a lot of time really up until the last days that I was submitting applications, going through and continuing to read faculty books that I could make sure that the tone of my personal statements was aligned well, particularly with the current work the PIs I identified were doing.
Awesome. And so some questions related to that I see. I'm going to put two questions together. Someone asked what a typical GPA for applying to grad school is, and then someone else asked if obtaining a master's degree would help them when applying to PhD programs. And I think those two might be related.
I remember a lot of the GPA stuff that I ended up seeing just was like way high. Just what, like 3.8, 3.9, and I was like, I took a lot of hard sciences. I like that stuff. I like really was an undergrad to learn things and didn't care so much that I wasn't making A's anymore. So that's hard. I ended up with like a 3.1 GPA in undergrad. But I know for me, particularly with the GPA, also with the master's degree, it was more of like solidifying my interests. I wanted to make sure that this was something, because 6 years is a long time. 5 years is a very long time to dedicate your life and sweat and tears to. So I just wanted to be sure it was something that I had an affinity for, would like doing, and the master's degree was very good for that. It was also very helpful in like seeing, okay, what are these other doctoral students doing? How do they live their life? How do they move in these places? So it's like every person has their own thing. I know some people end up doing post-bacs, and people have been able to work in a research lab and kind of get that research experience and then just apply like with the bachelor's degree. But there are plenty of options for you. So as far as the master's degree goes, I think it really depends on what you bring to the table and what your focuses are. And as far as it goes, I think above a 3.0 is like usually it, but I don't think that that's a hard and fast rule. And I don't think it's, like I said, just like no one's going to let you in because you have the highest GRE score, no one's going to let you in because you have the highest GPA.
Does anyone else want to add on?
I would say that if you feel worried about your the impact any of your raw numbers, your GPA or GRE scores, TOEFL scores may have. I know with TOEFL scores, sometimes there are firmer requirements at the university level, but really for any of those pieces, you notice yourself feeling worried, getting, consulting with a faculty mentor, another professional mentor, an advanced doctoral student who can help you think about how to frame those features, if it might need to be addressed in your letter, or how to address it in an interview. I think that can be really clarifying and just help you kind of keep your confidence up and keep focused, so you can as well as you're presenting yourself to faculty.
Yeah, I think I agree with what you guys said. As someone who wanted to go into a PhD directly after my bachelor's, and then going into a master's instead first, I think for me personally, it was really helpful to refine my research interests, and really see what graduate school or being a graduate student really meant. So thank you.
I'm wondering, so we're right at the hour now. We want to transition to the debrief and open this up for questions. So again, the debrief will be the portion that is not recorded. We have a couple of closing slides to go through before actually launching into that. But if there are things people want to ask that they'd prefer not be recorded, the debrief is going to be the time to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
So these wrap-up slides that I mentioned, so Brittany talked about the importance of applying to and attending APA accredited programs for your professional standing. Division 17, the division we belong to, the Society of Counseling Psychology, provides a really nice overview on the website. I think there may be one program missing, but it's pretty comprehensive. The Insider, most recent edition of the Insider Guide also has all of these schools. So that's definitely something to check out. The division also has for students another list of recommended resources. These are compiled by professional members, I believe. So are a good insight into what faculty should be looking at as you prepare. One faculty member in particular, shout out to Joseph Hammer at University of Kentucky. Brittany knows him. He is really open-handed and generous, and has put together a really lovely list of articles and other resources, many of which I think he's written on the application process. There's a lot of other resources on his site related to developing your professional skills in different domains. So we wanted to pass along the link to his website. A former doctoral student in, I believe, education, who's now a faculty member at the University of Chicago, has wrote a really classic kind of guide on blending personal and professional identity in personal statements. Her name is Eve Ewing, and I wanted to link that because so much of the personal statement is balancing that fine line between personal and professional self and writing something memorable. And when she published this guide, it went around the internet like wildfire. I read it through several times as I was applying and got lots of compliments on my personal statement. And it was, the approach I used was very much informed by this guide, so we wanted to pass it along.
Right, and just a word about Mitch's uncensored advice. It's a PDF. For those of you who are interested in the mental health field in general, or if you just want to be a mental health professional, whether it's a counseling doctoral or any other level, that's really good for that kind of like sussing out like, I want to see clients on a regular basis, but I'm not entirely sure if, a doctorate is for me. There's plenty of information like that as well there, but also deciding between like, I only want to do research. I really don't feel like seeing clients. And it's like, well, they've got some developmental psych PhD programs out there for things like that. So just some things to keep in mind.
And last but not least, I mentioned this before, but as gets closer, the Grad Cafe results search is an extremely helpful record of when interview invitations went out, when interview dates were set for various programs in previous years. So looking at those can give you a rough sense of timelines to be thinking about, particularly if these dates are not published or emailed out by programs themselves. Not all programs announce them publicly. Program themselves, their site is the first resource to turn to, but if you can't find it there, Grad Cafe results search is definitely really helpful as you get into the nitty-gritty of timing interviews. If anyone is looking at this list and thinking, oh my gosh, I need to scribble these all down before we change slides, please don't worry. We're going to send a recording of this webinar as well as just the PowerPoint file of this presentation out so that you can all have a copy. We'll get it to all the program representatives so they can advance it out to you. And we'll post to social media. So there'll be multiple outlets to make sure you have these resources on hand. In terms of staying connected, I just mentioned the listserv. The listserv is the best way to stay in touch with us. You do need to be a member, a student member of the division to get on there. And we have some instructions up here on the screen on how to join. Our social media are also a great outlet. We are on Facebook, we are on Twitter, we are, I believe, on Instagram. And so if you aren't on the listserv or you check those media more consistently, those are also places you can find us and stay in touch with us. So with that, we're going to transition to the debrief. I am going to turn off the recording here. If you are watching the recording, we're going to say goodbye. If you are live with us, let's continue the conversation.